What I so admired about Nancy was that ability to do just that. She knew how to protect her husband and her president, but also her own place, to stand her ground, and once it had been resolved, to move on.
There likely wouldn't have been a President Ronald Reagan without a Nancy Reagan.
Unlike so many people these days, she never seemed to harden differences into definitions.
Occasionally, I've thought that even God might not have the guts to argue with Nancy Reagan.
That was just a very small portion of some tremendous remembrances today for Nancy Reagan, as politicians, journalists, and celebrities joined the Reagan family to bid a final farewell to the former First Lady and a final farewell to the Reagans and the Reagan legacy, perhaps. Joining me now from the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, Reagan biographer Craig Shirley and NBC's Tom Brokaw and Andrea Mitchell, who both, of course, covered the Reagans extensively. Tom, let me start with you. You had a wonderful eulogy of her. It was, you guys didn't see this, but it was an amazing split-screen moment for the Republican Party. This legacy being honored of the Reagans, and at the same time, Donald Trump was stirring things up. It's sort of, my head is still spinning, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I did think about that today, the food fight that we've been all witness to on the Republican Party going on, and then the kind of dignity that the Reagans brought to the process. It doesn't mean that they didn't play hardball, because they certainly did. And it took them a while where they wanted to go. You know, people remember he made a feint run in '68, ran again against Gerald Ford, when he got ready to run the last time. He did get beat in Iowa, but they came back strong, and they were very strong, but they always had a kind of elegance about the campaign. It was well organized. They had grown-ups around them. And when they had something to say, they had something to say that landed in the American public.
You know, Andrea, what really came through today in all of the eulogies was how Nancy Reagan was the extra bit of steel in Ronald Reagan's spine.
In fact, the fact that he did not have that suspicion gene, he was not that political in all of his dealings with people. He wasn't skeptical. He didn't see who was, you know, as Jim Baker said, paddling their own boat. And she had that gene. She was the worrier. She stayed up at night worrying so that he could sleep better. And it was her being the political antenna that made him so successful, as, again, Jim Baker and as Ron Jr. said, he would not have been President Reagan without her, and he certainly would not have been as successful a President Reagan without her.
You know, Craig, you've written so extensively on the Reagans, on Ronald Reagan, on the fight to sort of the battle to define conservatism via the vision of Ronald Reagan. Who is embodying Ronald Reagan's conservatism today?
Well, probably nobody and everybody in a certain sort of way. Nobody completely, but everybody partially. You know, nobody goes around calling themselves a Bush Republican or a Nixon Republican, but a lot of people call themselves Reagan Republican, even if they don't understand it. But basically, American conservatism, as Reagan practices, as he understood it, was that power flowed from the citizenry up to institutions, as opposed to the British form of conservatism, where power flowed downward from institutions to the individual. It went sideways with the Bushes and big government republicanism, and that's why the party is having so many problems today, is that it's lost the meaning of Reagan conservatism, which is why you see basically the bloodbath going on for 2016 for the nomination.
You know, Chuck, what I do is recommend. I was going to say it. I recommend to people, including all the people running now, to read the Reagan Diaries. They're exceptional pieces of remembrance on his part, wrote every night in longhand, and you got a real insight to who he was, what he believed, and how he thought things could get done. When they had to have the tax increase, Jack Kemp came down pounding the table, and the president effectively sent him home and said, Jack just doesn't get it. You get things done in politics by getting a compromise going.
And in fact, what Jim Baker said to me earlier this week was that he would sit in the Oval Office at the end of the day, the legislative strategy team, and one-on-one then they would go into the Oval Office and he would sit with the president, and the president would say, just get me 80%. That'll be good enough. Get me 80%. Yeah. I was also struck by the letter that Brian Mulroney, who was very close to them, socially and politically, the letter that he wrote, it was a Christmas Day letter of Ron Reagan to his wife Nancy, their first White House Christmas. And when that book of letters came out, you realized the elegance of his writing, the intelligence that went into it, the attributions to poems.
Yeah.
He was very, very bright. He was a beautiful writer. No speechwriter could have written those beautiful love letters.
Well, not only that, and every husband, including myself, you think, boy, do I have this in me. You know, I mean, it really does. You're like, gosh darn you, Ronald Reagan, you're making us all look so bad. Hey, Craig, one of the other parts of the elegance of the Reagans was the way his opponents treated him. I was stunned in reading the Carter Diaries when Jimmy Carter was, you know, the whole Panama Canal issue was a huge issue, and he knew Reagan was on the other side of it, but he even gave Reagan a heads up of what was coming as sort of so that, you know, there was a proper way to be against it.
Well, it was a different time. Carter was making a very good case for the Panama Canal Treaties. Reagan was leading the charge against the Panama Canal Treaties, so much so that CBS actually offered private citizen Ronald Reagan a half-hour broadcast time. Can you imagine that today? But they offered him a half-hour broadcast time to go on national television and make his case against the Panama Canal. You know, most politicians today, Chuck, think in sound bites. Reagan thought in chapters, and he thought about that it was introduction, conflict, and resolution. He was probably one of the since Teddy Roosevelt, one of the best read and best written presidents of the 20th century.
And Tom, that does seem to be what. Look, let's go back to Nancy Reagan's legacy here. I think she got the short shrift when she was First Lady, that there was a lot of staffer leaks and things like that to try to paint her a certain way. And I think she seems to be getting her due now, a little late, but getting her due really is among the trailblazers of First Ladies.
Well, what you heard, one person after another close to the president today said he wouldn't be president without Nancy Reagan at his side. She was the steel in him, and she also had a great political calculus about what could go and what couldn't go. And I believe, for all the criticism that she got about her fancy gowns and the China and the White House, she restored a sense of dignity and majesty to it that the public wanted to see. They wanted that to be their home, and they wanted to be an emblematic place of the great power and the standing of the United States in the world. And she got that. Their state dinners, for example, were never completely over the top, but you had a sense that you were someplace special when they put on a dinner for whoever it happened to be in town at the time.
You know, and it's a legacy that I feel like all of the successive presidents since seem to carry on. Anyway, Craig, Tom, and Andrea, thank you all. You have no idea what you missed in St. Louis with Donald Trump.
Yeah, we do.
I think we're all glad we did. I think we're all glad we're here instead.
Yeah, I think